welcome back to the Green Path Psychotherapy podcast. So here we have our clinicians joining us, same clinicians as last time. We have Jen, we have Rebecca, we have Jess, and myself, Alex. So good to see you all, and thanks again for joining us. So today we're going to be diving into a pretty hot topic. This has been something that I think has really been circulating the therapist community, and this is using AI as, I guess, a substitute therapist. I think we all have had experiences already with clients who have been doing this. And so today we're going to, just answer some questions related to this, but also what it's like from our side as well, right? Using AI for, let's say, our purposes and writing clinical notes, but also maybe some issues that we've been noticing as well. Let's jump in. I have a few questions here. Okay, so if AI automates clinical notes and treatment plans, do we lose the vital unconscious processing time where therapists can sit with a client's story outside of the session? What do y'all think?
What I would say is, I do use AI for notes for some clients, and I will say I think that I like writing my notes as well because it does help to kind of process what's happening and thinking about it. And I also think that sometimes it can be helpful in terms of like potential burnout, because note taking is a pretty big part of therapists' work. And when I have a lot of sessions back to back, it can be helpful to kind of assist. But I think that's what it is. It's an assistance. I don't think it should completely supplement. In my case, I kind of use it as a bit of a tool to help me organize things, and then I kind of edit and like process it the way that I need to. But I think, yes, I think that it can potentially hinder a bit of that processing time. But I also think it can be valuable for like management of time and things like that.
I'm on the other side of it. I refuse to use it. Well, part of this is I have a lot of clients who are anti-AI, and so I'm very conscious of the fact that they wouldn't want me to use AI to supplement their work, and I don't have their permission to, and nor would I do that without their permission. And so like that's part of it, but also the fact that like I really like to work within my own sort of brain and my own capacities. And I don't trust AI. Like part of my issue with AI is like it's not always accurate. It has biases. And I don't want that to influence how I perceive a client or how I engage with my clients. Like that kind of scares me that there would be that sort of like influence in that way. And this is unrelated to your question, but there's like a lot of incidents of people getting like their psychosis influenced by AI. There was a man in Florida who killed someone because he wanted to like transfer AI into the body of that person, and then when it didn't work, he killed himself. And so there's like some really dangerous things about AI that kind of freak me out and scare me, that I'm sort of hesitant to use it in any capacity.
I'm similar to Jess, where myself, I don't use it. A lot of my clients are anti-AI. But I attended a presentation by Marino Badilla Diaz for Ontario Social Work Month. And she was talking about AI and how it can make a lot of errors. So I think if you are a clinician who uses it as a tool, that's your own choice. You need your own client's consent, all those things. But you really need to double check your work, right? I think lots of clients assume, oh, cool, my therapist does no work. They just, copy paste the note. That would be really unethical because there are lots of errors. She shared an example in her presentation where the AI had said that like the client had good eye contact, where the AI can't see the client. It's just audio transcribing, right? AI is programmed to give you a response no matter what. And sometimes those responses aren't accurate. So you have to be very careful. If you are using it as a tool, you have to be very, very careful and double check your work.
Even just to explain it to viewers, like how do therapists use AI? So typically, it's kind of like a built-in feature for some programs or platforms that we use. And these are like confidential platforms. So the one that we use is Jane, and they introduce something called AI Scribe. And so what happens is you would press record, and the system would record the session, and then it would summarize it at the end in the way that you want. And so they claim that it's completely confidential, and that, you know, it's not like they utilize that information. I think really a big piece though is like, I don't feel confident in it because I don't know much about it. So even though the website is like claiming this, I'm almost like, even when I have like shared this with clients, like if they would be open to using it, I basically say whatever Jane has told me that it does or whatever. And so that's what I just kind of echo, but I don't actually really understand what's going on. And so I don't know. I think there's something about the novelty of it that, because I'm not really kind of convinced with it myself, it's almost hard for me to convince clients. On the other hand, though, that idea of something summarizing my notes is like, it's exceptional, because it really does take a lot of time to complete client clinical notes. And so it is helpful as a tool, but I think it's just in that kind of place where it's like people are sketched out about it, right? And even clients are kind of like, I don't really know if I trust that. Like, it's recording what I'm saying, and you're saying it doesn't store it, but then it is summarizing my notes, so it is storing it. So anyway, and I don't have the answers to those questions. So yeah, it's kind of, I hear there's like two sides to it. And so some people are really against it, some people are all for it and find it really handy.
I would say I think it's really important, like with anything therapists use, they need to have some good base knowledge of it, and to check your work and be careful like how it's being worded. So it's not as supplementation, I think, of notes. You have to be engaging with it, and I think that's totally fair. And I think like with anything, explaining the risks and benefits of it is really important to make an informed decision. I think though AI is here to stay and it's gonna keep evolving. So you know, whether or not we feel comfortable with it, I think it's interesting to see like the progression of how it could potentially, maybe eventually, also be a helpful tool. Like for example, I saw an article about this where it would record like risks, for example, of like if somebody seemed like they were in psychosis or something like that. So there are ways in which AI is being used in helpful ways to kind of support therapists. But yes, there's also the other parts of it where maybe that could be harmful. So yes, I think using it with caution and, you know, making sure to let clients know risks and benefits of it is super important.
Totally. And just to add to that too, with the whole confidential piece of it, I think maybe there is a difference. There should be a difference. Again, I don't know much about this, but like OpenAI versus, you know, the paid version of AI that we're using that is incorporated into the program that we're using, right? So when we're talking about like OpenAI, you know, the whole thing about like partnering with the Department of War in the US and how that's opened up this whole new can of worms around security and what's happening to data. I think those kind of platforms, there is no there is no really security, right? It's kind of like you're putting yourself at risk when you're doing that, and that's just kind of up to each person, the user's discretion. But this, I'm hoping that there is a little bit more regulation, or there's some kind of parameters when it comes to these kind of more paid versions that are specifically made for like working with like confidential data. Okay, so question number 2, beyond data privacy, do we have a duty to warn clients that AI might reinforce confirmation bias?
Yeah. I mean, the reason that it contributes to psychosis is because it feeds people responses that they want to hear, right? And so like it's sort of designed to feed you what you want to know as opposed to what you should know. And that's not necessarily a safe perspective to have when you're struggling, right? It doesn't challenge you, you know, like it validates, but it doesn't challenge. And part of being a therapist is balancing those two things. You know, the sort of the change strategies with the validation. And you don't get the change strategies when you're working with AI.
I want to echo what Rebecca said earlier of like, it's here to stay. And so like, you know, I do have some clients who use it And, it's not my job with my bias to say, hey, I don't use it, you shouldn't. But with anything my clients do to educate them about the risks and benefits and those sorts of things. And like Alex was just saying, like OpenAI or many companies, they're about consumerism and they just want to make money. They're not here to protect your data. So being really mindful of like, if you're using it, what platform you're using, why are you using it, right? Is it like an adjunct to therapy or an adjunct to another resource you're using? Or is it the sole thing you're focusing on?
Yeah, and I think, also like I guess the open AI, closed AI, like for example, the kind of AI for Jane is HIPAA approved. So, there's like a little bit more regulations, and it doesn't typically, well, as far as they claim, it doesn't record like the client side, it's only therapist side, things like that. So there's like distinctions there. But yeah, like I think I kind of have a different feeling that like ChatGPT and stuff like that, where part of the beauty of therapy is that it's very dynamic and complicated, and there's a lot of error, and that's actually a good thing when there's error, because it brings a place of like repair, and repair grows relationships, and that's really what being a human is always about, making errors and how do you repair them. Whereas with ChatGPT, let's say, which clients use, which I mean you can, but recognizing that it's not going to challenge you the way that a day-to-day interaction would with another person. And there's so much value to that.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember like what the priority is. Like these platforms are trained to prioritize like user satisfaction and report. So it's not telling you maybe what you need to hear, it's telling you what you want to hear. Right. And so, even going back to those, like what Jess was saying around like how it's almost that feedback loop. It's reinforcing certain things that can be actually very harmful. I think it can really almost like facilitate that reassurance seeking that, let's say, clients who struggle with like anxiety or like OCD, they're like coming and they're like, oh, I want someone to validate me. That's actually not helpful. And sometimes that could also lead to something like self-diagnoses, and we know how dangerous that could be as well, right? And so, again, it's like proceeding with caution, and I think also really reflecting like on the user standpoint, what it is that you're hoping to get out of this. Because in a way, I think people know that they're going to get that validation, and even though that feels good in the moment, that's not actually helpful in the long run, and could be potentially dangerous.
I also think like there's more safety measures in place now than there were when sort of OpenAI and various other things came into play. But they still haven't done a full assessment of like where should the parameters be and where should the safety measures be, and like, if someone it used to be that if you were talking about suicidal thoughts, it would feed into them. Now they've put in a safety measure, like at least with OpenAI, with ChatGPT, where like if you bring up suicidal thoughts, it actually says like reach out for help and various other things, which is great. But before that, it was quite dangerous, providing information that people shouldn't have when they're in a vulnerable state.
Totally. Yeah. It's interesting too now, if like you go on ChatGPT and like asked it this question, I was like, so what do you think about using you as like a therapist? And it's like really great in naming all the points as to why like ChatGPT should not be your therapist. It's like, the confidentiality piece, I'm telling you what you want to hear. I'm like, okay, someone trained you well. And I think the unfortunate piece of that is it came from some pretty like tragic cases that happened prior. And so they had to really kind of like recalibrate the system and do what they needed to do with that. Because again, it's new. And so it is still in that kind of like training phase. But it is helpful to know that at least now certain platforms are a lot more kind of maybe cautious in their responses.
Well, I think like it's very clear when they were creating AI that they didn't hire social workers. Or therapists for that matter, right? Like there wasn't people who could foresee the problems that came about, hired into the process. That, and I don't even know that they, used a lot of lawyers. Maybe they did, I don't know. But it seems like there was a lot of, blind spots.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think again, like I think of like a harm reduction lens of something we use a lot in therapy of like, if we're going to do something, anything. How do we reduce harm? And so there's a platform I've recently learned about called WYSA, WYSA. And so if you are going to use AI as like a therapeutic support, it is designed by therapists. And again, it's not a substitute, but at least it's designed by therapists. It, you know, is informed and programmed with evidence-based modalities like CBT. So again, it still doesn't delete the need for therapy or other supports or social connection in your life, like Rebecca said. But if you are to use a tool, there's like a safer one or safer platform to use.
That's good to know. And that's a good segue into the next question of how do we handle the ethical risk of deceptive empathy? So even if there are these parameters in place, how do we even just kind of how are we addressing that piece of like AI creating almost this kind of like synthetic warmth or connection with a person?
I think it's an interesting topic too. When you said like it's programmed that way, it's programmed for like certain people. So there's some of my clients who have reported it's quite invalidating because it's informed by like Western heteronormative ideology. So if you are from a more marginalized community, it might actually be invalidating to use AI. So like it really depends like where the information to program it is coming from.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And well, I was recently looking at like the difference between like empathy and like enmeshment. I don't know why, but this is kind of reminding me a bit of this of like what is like, I almost kind of see like AI as like an enmeshment sort of situation where it's like, it's predicting what you want to hear and it's going to give you what you want to hear. Whereas empathy means, yes, you can see where they're coming from, but it doesn't always mean you agree with them or that you like, you know, there's a bit more nuance in that. You can see where they're coming from. You can empathize, but you may, for the good of the person, challenge them in some way or, you know, provide them with like a yes and, right? Whereas, you know, AI is, yeah, it's like, it's pattern recognition. Like, how can I try and predict what empathy would sound like or feel like? It's not necessarily not like growing empathy, if that makes sense. Like not something that would I don't know, you know, there's an element of it that feels like it just it's what you want to hear and it can feel good, but it's not going to be always helping you to the right thing, you know. I don't know, it's kind of how I see it.
I also think it can, to some extent, if you're relying on AI for that connection, limit your ability to be vulnerable with really like real people, right? Like, you know, because it's a lot easier to be vulnerable with something that's going to just sort of like feed you that sort of predictive loop versus somebody who might challenge you. And who might, you know, question, you know, or maybe even make a mistake and not be empathetic, right? Like it's sort of, it challenges your ability to self-validate in those instances where you're invalidated by something that isn't AI. And that's hard.
Yeah, it almost kind of brings up that concern. I'm kind of quoting this from like the book The Anxious Generation, talking about like the dangers of social media, especially, you know, for people who are in a more vulnerable period of their life, such as teens or pre-adolescents as well, where it's, you know, replacing the human connection with the computer, with AI, right? And even when I think about like clients who have complex trauma histories and, you know, when we're talking about attachment, what happens when someone does become attached to a robot, right? But that robot, like there are limits to that as well. And the robot, again, doesn't actually care about how you feel. And it's really hard, though, to distinguish that, like what you're getting from this robot from like a real connection, because again, AI is saying everything you want to say, right? But then to what extent, or like where does this go? Where is this leading to? And I almost kind of see it as more like, okay, I'm becoming more and more isolated from people. I actually don't want to be around people. That idea of being vulnerable with other people, I mean, and that's what really does strengthen a bond or, you know, help us become more intimate with other people. Like that's all being eliminated, right? And so in a way, it almost kind of sounds like it's enabling maybe a certain like anxiety, the fears that we have, without like giving this very kind of superficial or filling in this very kind of this void for human connection in a very superficial way.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, they call this generation a lonely generation, and I think so much of it is because people are not risking rejection or pain, or like there's so much comfort in like not having those risks, I guess. But like that is what makes people resilient, is like going through it and knowing you can, and like getting your feelings hurt. Maybe that person doesn't get you all the time, and yes, it hurts, but you learn a lot from that. And I think there's comfort in AI probably for people, like as we've talked about. But I don't know. The connection, I think, is deeper with another person that's imperfect. I think that's also very validating to know that somebody else is not perfect and that they don't have the right response all the time, but that they still might care about you and they still want to learn from their errors. That's to me a deeper, more meaningful connection. And so I do worry a little bit on that front of like, what would AI do if there's a over reliance on it?
So that's it for today. Thanks everyone for answering questions. If any, viewers have any comments they want to share, feel free to post that and reach out to us. We'd love to continue this conversation with you. But for now, take care, everyone. Bye.